update here on Talk Radio. Still joined live in the studio by the Associate Editor of Times Magazine, Jane Mulkerrins. We'll talk about the health and care bill in a few moments as well. We'll be here with Jason Reed, writer and political commentator. Lots more besides, including our Right Royal Roundup coming up right here. It's Talk Radio.
Weekend Breakfast with Cristo on Talk Radio.
And the health and care bill is interesting, by the way, Jane Mulkerrins, because the government wants to integrate health and social care. However, one of the elements of it... Now, I don't know whether you know this about me. I am absolutely sick to death of governments that decide that they need to nanny us. I hate it.
I did know this about you.
Good.
Because I've known you for quite a long time.
Good. But I hate it. I hate the amount of unnecessary hours I have to have by reading, that a bag of nuts contains nuts, or that a hot drink I've bought might be hot, or the fact that this idea in a society where we have to try and eliminate risk, which is impossible, and all you do by trying to completely eliminate any risk, COVID's been a really massive example of that, is you just inconvenience everyone's life when life is not risk-free. For me, it is ridiculous that what we're saying about, the changes to the highway code is part of it as well. What we're doing is we're saying that it's the state's responsibility to remove risk from you. It's not your responsibility to remove risk from yourself, because essentially you're too stupid. We have to nanny you. And it becomes self-fulfilling, because then someone falls over on a wet floor and they say, well, where was the sign? Where was the sign to say the floor was wet? It's not my fault. I'm a pedestrian and I want to cross the road. It's not my responsibility to look. No. It's the driver's responsibility to anticipate that I'm going to do that. And if I get hit by the driver, I might be dead, but we'll blame the driver instead, because it's this march towards this idea. You're looking a bit cynical at me.
Well, I do
Do you
think
not get what I have something in this?
I mean, I do agree with you that sometimes stating the obvious, is just patronising and condescending, and also teaching people to have no level of responsibility for themselves and their own safety.
Because then people expect it, and then they become more stupid.
And they become infantilised, yes.
And they need it more.
And I think there is a level of learnt helplessness that can go on with that. I mean, I don't know that that's always what the aim is, though, because I don't know. I mean, isn't part of it just because there's a fear of litigation?
Yes,
if people hurt themselves, and I think
that's a part of it too.
I think that's a large part of it.
And it's this idea that nothing is my fault. It's always someone else's fault because I have no personal responsibility. It's this idea, and it is almost politically there's an ideological element to this, which is why I believe that we are moving towards a more left-wing idea of how we treat people in society, i.e. the state is the encompassing thing, and you need the state to tell you what's dangerous because you can't possibly do it yourself.
Okay, so
that's socialism.
If you think that we are marching towards socialism right now, tell me how we are going to be the first country in the world to declare COVID over. We're going to abandon all COVID...
after having been the most socialist in the way in which COVID was dealt with.
But we are going to abandon all COVID precautions. We're going to allow people to just decide if they should test, if they should isolate, if they should wear a mask.
You know what's happening here, Jane? This is your indoctrination that we are witnessing right here on the radio, because you are seeing just normal freedoms being returned to us as a move away from this amazing move away from socialism. No, that's just the life we should have had anyway.
So you don't think there should ever have been...
You are indoctrinated.
You don't think there should ever have been any mandates about isolation or testing?
I didn't say that. There are occasions when there is a crisis where the state needs to step in and be a big state. Without a doubt, I'm not that militant about it, but what I'm saying is that then at some point the state needs to roll back. The state did not do that for the last 2 years. The state actually increased its power, it increased its size. We now have the biggest tax burden that we've had since 1945. We are no longer a small state society. We have a Labour Prime Minister who is high tax, high spend, and those...
We have a Labour Chancellor.
we have a Labour Chancellor, we have a Labour Prime Minister, we have a Prime Minister with no ideology, and the only reason that we have now our freedoms being returned to us is because it's politically prudent for the Prime Minister, not because it's ideologically what it believes in.
I do agree with you on that point. I think that the abandoning of all COVID precautions are the last-ditch efforts of a desperate man, seeking a populist of his leadership.
I think we're going to be talking to Jason Reed about this in just a moment. In fact, let's talk to him right now. The writer and political commentator Jason Reed joins us here on Talk Radio. Morning to you, Jason.
Good morning, Cristo.
Did you just hear what we were discussing
I did, yeah.
there? And so obviously the health and care bill is a part of this. I mean, I don't know, did you agree with some of what I was saying about this idea that we are trying to legislate and almost control everyone when it comes to their level of risk, when it comes to decisions that they need to make in their life, or am I being a bit off there?
I agree with you completely, Cristo. As part of this nanny state narrative that we've seen time and time again, and that has, of course, cropped up during the pandemic and is now being exported to other areas, such as obesity and food regulation. And it just comes
and that's part of this bill, isn't it?
It is.
The way in which they want to deal with obesity and food regulation. I mean, what is it that they are doing in this bill, the health and care bill, that is centering on that, and why is it you object to it?
There's a number of really incredible things in this bill. They're trying to address obesity by cracking down on promotional offers in supermarkets, on what the government decides is unhealthy foods. So buy one, get one free, or 3 for 2 on crisps or chocolate. They're trying to ban that effectively. There's a load of new advertising rules. There's going to be a new watershed that you can't advertise after 9 p.m. for certain foods, a ban at all times online to advertise certain foods. And all of this is just part of this same nanny state narrative of the state looking down on us. And worst of all, at a time of a cost of living crisis, it's going to make shopping more expensive. There's a study from the Food and Drink Federation which predicts that it'll add an extra £160 every year to our shopping bills, in addition to, of course, food prices going up by themselves and additional energy bills and things like that. So this is the last thing the government should be doing.
Just playing devil's advocate a bit, what I feel is frustrating, and I don't think it's the job of the state to step in with this. I think that customers should somehow make their voices heard on this, because I do see the logic of the fact that in supermarkets, you very rarely, it's changing a little, but very rarely do you see offers on fruits and vegetables that are you never see buy one, get one free on a bag of apples. You never see buy one, get one free on broccoli, things like that, on salad. It is generally those really fattening foods that you see buy one, get one free on. And as someone who struggled with his weight myself, I am familiar with the psychology of going, oh, that's a bargain. I will get that, because I wouldn't have normally bought it, but now I know I'm getting sort of a packet of 8 chocolate bars instead of just 4 for the same price. Oh, I will grab that. Now, I don't think that the state should be getting involved in it, but then how would you solve that problem if the state doesn't intervene?
Well, there are all kinds of innovations in this area, some of which are really interesting, which don't involve new regulations which make life more expensive for struggling families. For instance, there was a study in the US, I think it was a couple of years ago, where they tried adding yellow tape down the middle of shopping trolleys, and then writing on the shopping trolleys, this section is for fruit and veg, and this section is for everything else. And just by doing that, you haven't increased anyone's bills, anyone's shopping costs by doing that. Fruit and veg consumption went up by 50% in those areas. Similarly, there was a study in Iceland where the government partnered with the children's TV program Lazy Town, which calls fruit sports candy. And they did a campaign to promote kids eating fruit and veg, and kids eating fruit and veg went up 100% in those areas just by doing things like that. So there are plenty of ways to do it which don't add more costs during a cost of living crisis, which seems like a crazy thing to do. Food insecurity is a real issue in this country, which we don't talk about enough, I don't think. I believe the stat is 1 million adults know someone in their family or their household who's had to go without food for a whole day in the past month because they couldn't afford it. Jane, so the last thing we should be doing is adding more costs and making shopping more expensive.
I just want to bring Jane in, because how do you solve the problems of people who might be tempted with buy one, get one frees of stuff that is unhealthy, which, I think we all agree that buying that to excess is not doing the nation very good. And we all end up paying for it with the NHS and obesity and the like. But how does that problem, would you say that problem could be solved without the state saying, well, we've got to ban it? Because that, to me, is not the role of the state.
No. I mean, I think I'm glad that the point was raised about America, because over there,
Because you lived there for
I lived
many
there
years.
for 10 years, and fresh fruit and vegetables are incredibly expensive. I mean, if you were to do the sort of shop that you do in the UK in Sainsbury's or any other supermarket over there, you'd find it extraordinarily more expensive to buy fresh produce in America. Comparatively, processed food is very, very heavily subsidised by things like the Corn Growers Association of America. Corn syrup is in everything and is very heavily subsidised. And they have had to take extreme action in order to try to level out that difference for families on the breadline who, they can feed their family with junk food, 10 times more cheaply than they can with fresh fruit and vegetables. So they really did have to work very hard.
Isn't that where the state should step in?
Yes,
so banning those
absolutely.
Subsidies,
exactly.
That's the role of
so
state.
I think we need to
not
be
banning choice.
No, we should be looking at a much higher level about how we support affordable fresh fruit and vegetables, and unprocessed food, and also thereby supporting agriculture as well and those industries, as opposed to supporting and allowing subsidies for enormous organisations and lobbying groups who basically are causing type 1 diabetes in children by putting sugar in everything.
Well, what is the role of the state when it comes to things like this, Jason? Where should the state step in?
I think the role of the state is to educate and inform us in a sensible way, but even that within reason. Nobody needs a huge red label on a chocolate bar to tell us that it's got sugar in it. And the desire to do that comes from this mentality that ordinary people need help deciding what to put in their shopping basket because they're too stupid or too swayed by advertising to be able to make decisions for themselves. And that's just not the case. And the problem with the measures of the kind that are being proposed in the Health and Care Bill and more broadly as part of the anti-obesity drive is that they're not evidence-based. If you look at, for example, the advertising rules, the government did a study into its own policy with the online advertising ban for junk food, and it predicts that it'll remove a grand total of 1.7 calories from kids' diets per day. In other words, nothing at all. That's about the equivalent of half a Smartie, and that's going to have huge costs for the
and
advertising
who could just
industry.
eat half a Smartie, Jane?
I also think that the role of the state is to up things like domestic science in schools. I think children should be taught much, much earlier how to cook. They should be taught about nutrition, in a really holistic way. I think it's far too late and far too little when people get to secondary school. And I mean, I don't even know if domestic science exists in any normal way anymore, but we should be taught about how to look after ourselves and how to look after other people.
Completely agree. And I think that it's an absolute scandal in our society that the cooking in school is seen as the thing for stupid kids.
Yeah.
Whereas, in actual fact, I think it should be one of your compulsory GCSEs.
I agree.
Is some form of home economics,
Absolutely.
some form of home domestic food. I mean, do you agree with that, Jason? Actually, is that where the state should come in and say, look, rather than try and fiddle around with what people are buying in supermarkets, actually, we should be using the state when it comes to education and saying to as part of the curriculum in schools, you will learn how to make healthy home-cooked food from scratch so that therefore eventually within a few years the demand in supermarkets will always be for more of that healthy food, and then supermarkets will act accordingly when they see that the demand for other foods goes down.
Absolutely, yes. Schools are the place where we should be focusing our attention because that's when we learn, right? I remember my food education lessons and PSHE lessons where we learned about diet and things like that being pretty awful, to be honest. And so it's not a huge surprise that then you end up with an obesity crisis.
And you
so
never had to, those kinds of things never had exams as well, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
You knew that. I remember thinking that PHSE or whatever it was called, or PSE, you used to think, well, that's a DOS lesson, brilliant.
Yeah.
You used to love that because you didn't used to have to really pay attention or anything like that. And you should have to learn cookery as a basic, like maths, English,
Absolutely.
cookery.
And I think along with that, when we talk about home economics, it should also be how to run a budget. I think we should be looking at
that should be
money.
maths.
Exactly. Yeah, we should be looking at how to cook, how to budget, how to basically look after ourselves and look after other people.
Maths should be about that. It should be about mortgage payments. It should be about credit card payments. When was the last time any of us used an equation to find out the power of X or what A is, or how when was the last time that we had to find out the length of the hypotenuse of a triangle? We don't need any of that stuff. What we do is we educate people based on the fact that one or two people within that school might be geniuses, and what we do is we throw it all at the wall when it comes to all of that, hoping that for a couple of children it sticks and they go on to Cambridge.
No,
but then what that does is it fails the whole rest of the school. Whereas if you're brilliant at that, the schools should say, well, great, you are going to be brilliant at algebra or whatever. You can go on and be a scientist. We'll give you special lessons. But most of you are going to learn credit card payments, mortgage payments, debt management, running a household budget, all of the things we actually need.
Absolutely.
It's amazing you don't learn any of that in school. Jason, good to talk to you. It's Jason Reed, writer and political commentator. When we come back, we'll